Hey there, this is Katie from the Health, Wellness, and Chocolate Podcast. I'm so happy you're joining me today. I hope you had a wonderful Mother's Day. I know I did. This was actually probably my favorite Mother's Day I've ever had so far. And I think it's because they actually got me stuff. And I'm usually not a total gift person, but like my own kids, by their own volition, actually bought me things, and I'm stunned. They've never done that before in 20 years of being a mom, so that was really sweet. And then my husband had asked what I wanted, and so he got me an herb garden because I wanted to have some fresh herbs. So he got a big tub, and he set it all up for me, and I have some beautiful herbs growing outside, which I had really wanted for cooking and everything. So I was really thrilled with that. And I didn't get lingerie, so that's a plus. I think he knows now, like, do not buy me lingerie as presents because it's not thoughtful. So he's had to learn that lesson. But anyway, I hope you guys had a good day. To this week, I wanted to talk to you about simple pleasures versus indulgent pleasures. So last week for like the Mother's Day special, I went over some self-care tips and some ways that you can take care of yourself. A lot of times when you struggle with your weight, we only have so much emotional energy to get us through the day. And when it's over, that's it. And usually then, if you're anything like how I was, you wake up in the morning and you have goals that you want to hit, and you have an eating plan all laid out. And then you do really well. But then by the end of the day, maybe it's been a hard day, or the kids just haven't been great, or, just things have come up and it's just been aggravating or annoying. And then, it's just so easy to say when the kids go to bed, like, okay, I deserve this. And it's something, indulgent. And you even know, like, oh my goodness, if I have this, I'm so going to, undo all the good I did this whole week. But there's a part of you, right, that's like, I don't care. I deserve it. This was a hard day. So what I want you to do is start to learn how to take control of those thoughts that you have when it's like, I deserve this. I don't care. It's been a hard day. This isn't going to matter. And kind of come up with a game plan, because look, in life, you are going to have obstacles that come up that are going to keep you from the goals that you have set for yourself to hit that day. And what I want you to do is start kind of brainstorming ways around that. And so when the storms of life hit, it's not a shock. It's not like, how did this happen? I can't believe I had a terrible day. Like, of course you had a terrible day. We live in a fallen world, and this is life, and we're going to have terrible days some days. So you're going to plan for them, and you're not going to be caught off guard, and you're not going to answer those terrible days with undoing the good that you have done or the progress that you've made for hitting your health and wellness goals. So a lot of times, when I was studying all this, one thing that kept coming up for me, and it's almost like, if you can imagine, what is it? I don't watch a lot of TV, but there's like a game show where you like spin and then it lands on something. Well, I call that like the wheel of vice, right? If you have some gaps in your life that you don't have, you feel like maybe powerless around, or if you have stress that you don't know how to manage, or you have maybe a low emotional intelligence and you don't even know what that means, there's a good chance that you will have a bad day, because we all do, and you're going to spin the wheel of vice, and it's going to land on something that you're going to wind up doing. And it could be overeating. For some people, it is pornography. For some people, it is alcohol. For some people, it is drugs. For some people, it's overspending at the store, ringing up their credit cards. It really just depends on the wheel of vice, which way you get that indulgent pleasure. But if you don't know how to manage your emotions, you spin the wheel of vice, and whatever it winds up on is typically what you fall into. So someone who is an alcoholic, they're going to fall back on drinking when life gets hard. Someone who is addicted to drugs, they're going to fall back on drinking. On drugs. someone who is an emotional eater, when things don't go their way, they're going to fall back on food, right? So like that's kind of how this works. Like you spin the wheel of ice and typically whatever you wind up on. And, I have close family members that have had gastric bypass surgery. And so, they spin the wheel of vice and they would typically land on overeating, but because they had their stomach augmented, they could no longer overeat, right? They were unable to do that. So they had to change their vice because they never learned how to deal with the reason why they were overeating. They never dealt with that. They just eliminated the ability to. And so, your brain, its job is to seek pleasure, keep you safe, keep you happy, get you that hit of dopamine. So your brain's like, okay, now we have to find a new way to get that hit of dopamine. So what's it going to be? Spin the wheel of ice and let's see what comes up, right? And so, I have a close family member who was morbidly obese. And he could no longer overeat because he had the gastric bypass surgery. And a few years later, he became an alcoholic because he didn't know how to manage his emotions. He only knew how to stuff them down. So first he used food and now he uses alcohol to do that. And when he was in the hospital because of the over drinking issues that he had, the doctor that had performed this surgery on him had mentioned to another person that was in the room that, I've had to actually reverse the surgery a couple of times because a few of the people have actually become addicted to heroin. So and I say this over and over again, extra weight is a symptom of a life out of balance. Drug use is a symptom of a life out of balance. Alcoholism is like you're coping for something that is lacking in your life. And so your job is to figure out what that is and then meet your needs in a better way than using overeating, using alcohol, using drugs, using pornography, using overspending, right? If you're listening to this, chances are you're using food to overcome, to fill in the gaps of your life. So I wanted to give you some ideas about indulgent pleasures and some simple pleasures to help you maybe start to reevaluate or actually recalibrate your life so that the simple pleasures can actually feel like pleasures as opposed to all these indulgent pleasures. So let me give you the definitions of them first and then give you some ideas and give you some examples. So a simple pleasure is really what it sounds like, simple. It's not a simple pleasure when you do it will not leave you feeling filled with regret, filled with shame, filled with like this feeling of, oh, why did I do that again? I can't believe I did that, right? Instead, a simple pleasure, you're going to feel refreshed after you do it. You will feel relaxed. You'll feel probably even more energized maybe, or like feel like, okay, I can go and tackle the world. So a simple pleasure may be just going to bed early and getting 7 or 8 hours of sleep, right? That's a simple pleasure. You never wake up like being like, man, I can't believe I did it. I feel so refreshed now. Ugh. Right? That never happens. It's always like, oh, I'm so glad I went to bed early last night. Actually, my son just turned 13 this weekend too. It's a busy weekend. And he had a bunch of friends sleep over. And they're a bunch of teenagers. So they were up late. They were outside playing. None of us got like a decent night's sleep. So the next day, we all went to bed. It was 9:00 at night. Like we were just, even us, the parents and everything. So we all went to bed and it was super early, but we needed it rather than stay up and feel like, oh, I have to just be up for the sake of being up or, really pushing ourselves. It was like, you know what? My body is tired. My brain is tired. I'm not showing up as good as I want to show up right now. I get grumpy by the time it's 9:30 anyway. So it's like, we're just going to bed. And that's what we did. So we went to bed early, but it's a simple pleasure, right? There's almost never regret for getting a decent night's sleep. There's always, you usually, if it is a good night's sleep, you feel refreshed. You're usually glad you did it. You're always like, oh, I'm so glad I did that, right? So you can think of your future self, and we've done some work on that. So like, what is the future? So for me, like, okay, future Katie, is she going to be glad I did this, or is she going to be really mad at me, right? So like, Is she going to be glad that I started having dessert and ice cream every night? Especially when she puts on a pair of jeans and they don't fit anymore. Like, is she going to be glad about this? Or is this going to be something that is not going to, serve her, right, in the future? So a simple pleasure, typically, the answer is actually always, for a simple pleasure, your future self will thank you for doing it, right? So a simple pleasure could be going for a walk outside, okay? And it does overlap a bit with self-care, but what I want you to do is start thinking of simple pleasures that you can do that speak to you, that you can start doing instead of the indulgent pleasures. So let's just define what an indulgent pleasure is, all right? So an indulgent pleasure or an imposter pleasure is something that your brain is going to tell you is a fantastic idea, but don't listen to it, right? So your brain's going to say, this ice cream sundae is going to make you feel so good. I promise. You're just going to want it. You should really go for it, right? Like, that is an indulgent pleasure. Now, there may be a time and place where a bit of ice cream is going to taste fantastic. But if you've gone, if you haven't listened to the first 5 podcast episodes that I ever did, go back and listen to that, especially if your goal is to lose weight, because I give you a format for you to follow. And one of the things that I talk about is planning everything 24 hours ahead of time. And the reason we do that is to help train, you have your prefrontal cortex. And so we're going to train using your prefrontal cortex, which is like the region of your brain that is in charge of goals. It's the part of your brain that can consider your future self and say, okay, I'm going to do this for her, right, in the future. And I've talked about before, you can actually, your brain can actually develop a relationship with a future version of you and actually consider it as if it was a separate person. Not in a weird way, but just in a way of to help you hit your goals. You can use that to your advantage and be like, no, what is Katie? I'm 44. So what is 45-year-old Katie going to think if I have ice cream every night? She's not going to be really happy with me. I'm not going to do that to her, right? And you can kind of consider her a separate person. So do that. Think of her when you're planning this out. But the first 5 podcasts kind of go over some of the science behind why I have you do that, and really how to, jumpstart your weight loss, but also start to do some of these brain hacks so you can learn about how to not get into these indulgent pleasures. So an indulgent pleasure then would be something that you regret almost immediately after you do it. And if you're following what I teach you too, an indulgent pleasure would be something that you cave in with, that you don't do your splash of joy jar, you go off script. So you can, when you work with me, and I tell this to my clients all the time, you can have ice cream, but just plan it 24 hours ahead of time. So when you're sitting down to write out what you're going to eat tomorrow, you can put down, I'm going to have a scoop of ice cream. And then when you do, enjoy it, right? Don't have it with guilt. Don't gobble it down, taste it, savor it, enjoy it, and then move on, right? Don't make a big deal out of it. Be like, oh, I'm glad I had it. I'm not going to beat myself up. I planned for it. That's totally cool. So an indulgent pleasure would be one that is you're driving by the ice cream place and you're like, I'm just going to go for it and have a hot fudge sundae, and you go and you get it and you eat it, and immediately when it's over, and really what you'll tell yourself too is as you're driving by, you're like, you know what, I deserve this. I've been so good, lately that I totally deserve this ice cream sundae and I'm going to have it. And so you pull into the ice cream place, you get that ice cream sundae, and you probably, if it's an indulgent pleasure too, you probably scarf it down. You probably gobble it. You probably don't really taste it. And then you probably even maybe eat it in your car, kind of hidden, and then throw it out and not let anybody know you did it, right? That's how you know maybe the difference of a simple pleasure and an indulgent pleasure. So an indulgent pleasure might be one you're ashamed of, or that you want to hide, or even you actually even hide it from yourself in a sense. You'll do it so fast and then you'll be like, well, it didn't really matter. It wasn't a whole lot, right? Or you kind of justify it that way. So an indulgent pleasure would be one that always is followed up with guilt or shame, regret, secrecy. You do not want people to know about it. You feel maybe embarrassed by it. You always have remorse, man, why did I do that? And then you really beat yourself up. Or what happens too is because you didn't keep your word to yourself, or you didn't stick to your plan, it actually does eat away a bit at your self-esteem and your self-belief. Like, I can't do this. I have no willpower. So a lot of times it's almost like a gateway then. This indulgent pleasure is almost like a gateway then to not caring for yourself, not sticking to your word, not thinking, okay, I'm powerless in this. I can't keep doing this. This is I don't have enough willpower. This isn't for me. I'm just a failure. This is, it's just genetics. My people just eat, and that's just what we do, right? Like, those are all the things that you'll probably tell yourself too when you have these indulgent pleasures. So really what you want to do, if you can think of, take time this week. I always say grab your pen and paper and do this, right? I want you to write down all the ways that you have, like, all the indulgent pleasures in your life. And this isn't a list that you need to show people. So don't feel like, oh my gosh, I don't want to make this list. And a lot of times too, like I said, you almost do it without even recognizing that you do it. So you might feel embarrassed actually seeing it on paper because maybe for so long you have actually denied even participating in some of these behaviors. But what I want you to do is write it down, because really you're not doing yourself any favors by not acknowledging behavior, because you are doing it. And if you think about this, when a lot of times when you have an indulgent pleasure, a lot of times we'll sit back and act surprised, like, oh, I don't even know how it happened. It just happened. But what I want you to do is start to challenge that thought, I don't know how it happened, with this thought. If you didn't, like, let's say you didn't have ice cream. We'll stick to my ice cream example. So let's say you didn't have it in the house because you're really trying to, not have it so it's not such a temptation to you. But you decide you're going for a drive and you just happen to pass the ice cream place that's your favorites, and you're going to, so you get in your car, you get your keys, you decide to go for a drive, you go down, you make all the turns that happen to go right in front of the ice cream place, you put your blinker on, you turn into the ice cream lot, you pull into the parking spot, you get out of the car, you walk into the place, you order your food, you sit down and you eat it, or you take it back to the car. And every bite, right? Like, look, think of all those decisions that you had to make in order to acquire that ice cream and sit there and eat it, right? It isn't a surprise. It isn't like, I don't know how it happened. It just happened, It's just, it's not a surprise. Your brain did it. You're just not acknowledging your brain did it, and you're not paying attention, right? You've kind of like checked out mentally, but that's not serving you anymore, right? It's not good for you, and it's actually hurting you, because you're hurting your self-esteem. You're feeling not empowered anymore by being able to make decisions and have control over those parts of your brain, right? So when it comes to indulgent pleasures, what I want you to do is start writing down all the indulgent pleasures that you do. And the best way I think you can recognize an indulgent pleasure is if you feel shame, regret, remorse, if you feel like it's a secret and you can't tell anybody that you do it, okay, those would all be considered indulgent pleasures. Or if you feel worse after you did it, okay, so take time this week to start thinking back, okay, what are the ways that I have indulgent pleasures? Maybe it's overeating at a mealtime. Maybe it's, you should be exercising, but instead you're using the time you had slotted for exercise to read. Or like, that's my indulgent pleasure, right? It sounds so nice. I get up at 5:30 in the morning, and that's only because I don't have a little baby that I'm nursing. I just weaned him, and so he sleeps a bit longer. So now I'm not getting up with a baby at night. So I'm a morning person, so I do get up around 5:30. For me, that works for me. I go to bed by 9:30 at night, so I get plenty of sleep. So if you're a night owl, obviously that's not going to work for you. And I'm not saying get up early. This is what I do. So I get up at 5:30. Because I want to, and I like having quiet time. So I read the Bible, I have a nice cup of tea, I do devotion time. And then around, so like probably by like 6:30, 7 o'clock, the kids start waking up, and I'll be reading another book, because that is my favorite thing to do, is read. But like, I know at 7 o'clock I have slotted from 7 to like 7:40 to work out. And I just do, like, the kids are playing in the living room, and I literally have an iPad, and I do my workout on the iPad. I use an app, and that's how I exercise. So I don't, it's nothing fancy. I don't even have to go to a gym. Like, I literally, like, I am on the couch reading, and 2 feet away is where I can exercise. And I'll be like, oh, let me just finish this chapter. Oh, let me just finish this chapter. And then before I know it, my window, it's almost 7:30 or 7:40. And I know now, like, the kids are hungry. They're ready for breakfast. And then I homeschool. So then now I got to feed them, and then we have to start school. And I've missed my window for my weight training, or, Pilates, or whatever it is I do in the morning. And I always regret that, right? I'm like, oh, why did I read through my time? But in the moment, it's like, oh, let me finish this chapter. Let me just take these notes. Let me do whatever. And it sounds like great, like, oh, it's just reading, right? But it's not doing what I actually wanted to do that would serve my health, and that would be to exercise. So for me, reading at that time of day, it would be an indulgent pleasure. So I would write that down. Like, okay, I'm reading when I really shouldn't be reading. I really should get a workout in, because I could always read in the evening, at night, or whatever. So there's always times. Plus, if I get up at 5:30, I've already read for over an hour and a half. like cut it off, Katie, and go exercise, right? So that for me would be an indulgent pleasure, because I do always regret doing it, because I'm like, oh, I missed my window. I should have exercised at 7 o'clock, like I said, like I told myself I would. And then your head starts to spin, like, oh man, why didn't I do that? I should have exercised. I should have done that. And like, you feel full of regret. So that would be an indulgent pleasure. So write down all through your day, or even your week, even the weekends, right? Because sometimes we have like 2 separate lives we lead. We leave a life on the weekends that looks totally different from the life we live during the week. So think about your whole week, or even your whole month, right, of indulgent pleasures that you participate in that aren't serving you, and that you really want to change. But you can't really change things if you don't acknowledge that you actually participate in them. And a lot of times indulgent pleasures are kind of sneaky. They may seem like a great idea, but they're not serving you. And again, you try to keep it a secret because you're maybe embarrassed about the behavior. But I want you to write it down. And then I want you to come up with ways that you can feel fulfilled with a simple pleasure, so that you don't feel like you need to have those indulgent pleasures, right? Like, so if you're full and your life is going well, and those gaps of life are not so deep, right? And, you can fulfill your life with some simple pleasures. So what would that look like for you, right? And then start thinking of some simple pleasures that you can do in lieu of these indulgent pleasures. So for example, if your indulgent pleasure is, let's say to go shopping, like if you've had a hard day and you want some retail therapy, right? So maybe like that would be considered an indulgent pleasure. Like I had a friend of a friend who she would do the retail therapy thing, and she would have the friend that we had in common, she would give her all the stuff she bought and tell her, just wrap it up in bags that look like presents. And then when you stop by my house, bring them in and pretend they're presents for my kids, so that my husband doesn't get mad that I went and spent this money on the kids or on their clothes or whatever. And that way it just looks like you brought them over. And that's such a terrible way to live, right? Like that was definitely an indulgent pleasure for her. It was this over shopping, overspending, feeling like she needed to hide what she was buying. But she was filling up her life with this indulgent pleasure rather than some simple pleasures. So what you want to do is start to strategize, right? And come up with ways that you can find some simple pleasures without using those indulgent pleasures. So simple pleasures would be ones that would leave you feeling refreshed. They would help you feel good about it afterwards. So when it comes to simple pleasures, you kind like the way your brain works is it wants to keep you happy, and it wants to avoid pain and seek pleasure all the time, right? That the limbic system of your brain. So your job then, of course, it's always going to think that the indulgent pleasures are such a good idea. Your job is to create simple pleasures in your life so that the indulgent pleasures aren't so alluring anymore. Because we all know when you're feeling depleted and when you're feeling low, that is the worst opportunity, for you to go ahead and indulge in these indulgent pleasures. So having a life with these simple pleasures or natural pleasures in them helps you avoid the pitfalls of these indulgent pleasures. So for me, let me give you another example. So for me, and I've told you this before, right? At 4:00 every day, I would be tired. It was a full day with the kids. And so my indulgent pleasure was to go grab a fistful of chocolate chips, right? And then that's what I would have. And that would help. One, it would help me check out a bit from like the stress and the chaos going on in the house. But also it gave me that hit of dopamine, and it just helped me feel better. But now, so that would be an indulgent pleasure, right? So my simple pleasure instead was at 4:00, we go outside, unless it's absolutely pouring rain or there's a blizzard, because we'll even go out in the winter time. We go outside. Okay. So now I know at 4:00 every day, there is like the volume gets turned up in my house. Everybody's a little bit cranky. We need a break, right? So I know now, instead of going for the chocolate chips, which is an indulgent pleasure, I can get a different kind of pleasure by going outside, soaking in some vitamin D. Everybody can be out there. We could blow off some dust. The kids can play. I can walk around. I could stretch my legs. I move my body. I walk. I get some exercise, especially if I missed it because I was busy reading in the morning, which I do. So like I can do that. I listen to a podcast so that I can enjoy and learn something new. And like, so all these like little simple pleasures help me not feel like, oh, those chocolate chips, like the power of the chocolate chips they're not so alluring, because I am being filled up in other ways that are better for me, that are more simple pleasures, but they're serving me as opposed to, making me feel like a failure and a loser, right? So, and then every time, say it's 5:00 now and we've been outside for an hour and we're all refreshed and we're all energized and we're all feeling like a bit of like, de-stressed a bit, now, I don't feel ashamed, like, oh, I can't believe we went outside and walked around for exercise. Like, I never feel that way, right? That never happens, okay? So, like, that would be considered like a swap out, right? I would have my indulgent pleasure, but I was able to swap it out. So go through your indulgent pleasure list and think of all the pitfalls that you have that you didn't want to do, but you wound up doing anyway. And how can you take that action? Maybe it's a time of day. Maybe it's a circumstance. Maybe it's a person, whatever it is. Find another way to get a simple pleasure than giving into that indulgent pleasure, and fill your life up with wonderful things instead of things that bring you shame and remorse and that don't help you, hit the goals that you want to hit. So think of your future self. Right? Think of that future version of you. I know now, when I started doing that habit a few years ago, now I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful I went through the uncomfortable feeling of fighting the urge to go ahead at 4:00 and go grab the chocolate chips, right? Like now I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I don't do that anymore. It's not even a thought. It's 4:00. My brain doesn't say, you better go get some chocolate chips. My brain's like, let's get outside, right? Like I've trained it. So that's eventually the point you want to get to. So you really need to be willing to be uncomfortable and fight that indulgent pleasure, that desire for the indulgent pleasure, and really work on coming up with simple pleasure strategies that you can do so that the indulgent pleasures are no longer, a vice for you that's keeping you from hitting the goals that you want to hit. So that is all I have for you today, but I hope you have an awesome week. If you want to dive deeper into this concept, please join the Health and Wellness Blueprint. You can join it for 7 days. It's only $1. Check it out. I have the link in the podcast notes here, or if you're watching this on YouTube, it's in the notes in the comments section on the YouTube channel. And so go ahead and sign up. You will have nothing to lose. It's $1, and you'll learn more of these strategies that I teach you, especially if weight is a pain point for you, or if you're finding like goals and just like not even weight, but like just like wellness in general. And you're feeling like, I want to set some health and wellness goals, but I keep falling back. Or I have the meta skills that I can teach you inside the health and wellness blueprint so that you can start hitting goals that you want to hit and being successful in this area. All right. But in the meantime, have an awesome week. Don't forget to do that. Write down your indulgent pleasures, and then go ahead and really come up with some simple pleasures that you can do instead. All right. Have a good week. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.